The history of solitary confinement starts back in 1790 when the three-story Walnut Street Jail in Philadelphia was expanded for solitary cells. The individuals incarcerated here were considered too dangerous and were required to be placed in solitary confinement. Separate confinement was then introduced by Maryland in 1809, Massachusetts in 1811, New Jersey in 1820, and Maine in 1823. The Eastern State Penitentiary in 1829 was considered the fullest expression of separate confinement. The men held captive had their own cells and were served food through a slot in the cell door. There was one small window to let light in, no ability for outside human contact other than the chaplain or prison staff. Purpose was to reflect and correct their life without distractions. Many inmates became insane or committed suicide under these conditions. Separate confinement decreased in the 1860s due to some overcrowding issues. In 1913, Pennsylvania ended separate confinement. Long term solitary confinement was considered cruel. Crime rates increased in 1970s and 1980s, calling for strict punishment. The 1980s is when solitary confinement started being heavily enforced. In the 1990s, several states constructed federal prisons, which are known as supermax prisons, to house dangerous inmates.
For those inmates that are in solitary confinement for a long period of time, it can definitely have a toll on their mental health. As humans, we need to have contact with others, and being isolated takes that away from inmates, which can affect them differentiate from what is real and what's not, meaning that they can start hallucinating. It also has a risk in developing a mental illness, and if that happens, then there's also a risk of developing psychiatric symptoms. This can lead to an inmate getting clinical depression, which can make them lose interest with things they would do in their daily life. They can also develop impulsive control disorder, which can affect them with controlling their emotions and behaviors. On the other hand, for the inmates that are in solitary confinement for a short period of time, the effects can be different. If there is any psychological effects on an inmate, they will usually be so subtle that you won't be able to notice them. It has yet to be established that there is any negative effects for an inmate's well-being, but if any, they will just be less dramatic than those who are isolated for a longer time. When isolated for a short time, solitary confinement isn't viewed as a cruel or inhumane punishment.
Solitary confinement exacerbates health problems and poses a serious public health threat. The physical health impacts of solitary confinement has tended to focus on issues like self harm and suicide. Prisoners who serve years in solitary confinement have nothing to look forward to, and their life to them becomes purposeless, which results in them wanting to harm themselves. Individuals in solitary confinement spend little to no time outside of their cells, and a lack of sunlight for such a lengthy period of time can lead to vitamin D insufficiency, which can result in weakening of the muscles and pain in bones. Exercise is crucial for maintaining health, and these inmates are limited because of the position they are in. To the right, I have included a chart which demonstrates post release deaths between individuals who experience solitary confinement versus those who never experienced it. Some physical effects for individuals who are in solitary confinement consist of enhanced hatred and violence by instilling a sense of powerlessness, cognitive disturbances ranging from lack of concentration to confused states, anger ranging from irritability to rage, obsessional ideas to full blown insanity, paranoia, and psychosis are common. If released, those inmates are unable to reclaim the social skills needed to live a normal social life.
The risks of isolation. Solitary confinement increases the moderate risk of reincarceration. The duration range inmates are placed in solitary confinement can be from 90 days to 3 years. Inmates spend about 22 hours a day with minimal social contact or privileges. Inmates are more likely to experience deprivations and victimizations from the guards inside of the prisons. Being in solitary confinement also increases the risk of mental deterioration. Recidivism. 68% of released inmates are likely to reoffend within 3 years of their release. Higher recidivism is shown in inmates who are directly released from solitary confinement into society. 33% of inmates placed in solitary are more likely to commit suicide. Inmates who are isolated also have less access to rehabilitation programs, which makes it harder for them to re enter into society. 47,000 laws impose restrictions on people with prior convictions. These laws make it harder for inmates to find a job, a home, or receive an education after being released. They are also deprived of the right to vote. Relapse. Inmates who experience solitary confinement show a significant increase of recidivism in 1 to 7 years following their post release. These inmates are often unwell or underprepared for reintegration due to the few or little access they had to rehabilitation programs while in solitary confinement. Reincarceration ends up costing more due to the process for inmates and all parties involved. High tension and stress in communities through victimization is also a factor for relapse. The increased violence and antisocial behaviors following post release is a factor that comes into play as well.